On this episode of the show, I have with me Joe Filio. He's a founder and CEO at Edio. We're going to be talking about his journey, and we're going to talk a little bit about how he got into tech and how his journey has shaped a little bit of his views on different subjects that we're going to cover. Started a company during the pandemic, focused on education. We're going to ask him some of what he is seeing shift in that educational market. We're going to talk about a little bit about what's happening with AI in education, a whole bunch of stuff. Joe, thanks for taking the time.
Amir, it's great to be here.
Absolutely. If you could tell everyone what the company does, that'd be great, and then we'll dive on in.
Yeah, absolutely. Edio is the leading AI, platform for K-12 school districts. So we work with, districts large and small, ranging from New York City and Palm Beach and Fulton counties, some of these 100,000 plus student systems, all the way to tiny, one-room schoolhouses in Alaska, where you can only get there by seaplane or by boat. So wide spectrum. What we do is we create, leading AI software for school districts to improve outcomes in math, to improve chronic absenteeism for attendance, to for interventions and MTSS, a whole host of things there to help districts really make it so that every student has an exceptional experience in school.
Fantastic. I'm so fascinated. I'm like, I need to interview the people that fly to fly into school, because I thought just walking or hopping the bus was a challenge. So that sounds
Some of them are pretty remote.
Yeah, that sounds tremendous. All right, well, fantastic, and we're going to dive into all that. And I guess we're going to start off a little bit at the top, right? And I think it was a good start to the story, because you mentioned you'd gotten into technology early, and maybe if you could kind of start us off there, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Indiana, far from everything, and I had some great teachers growing up who changed my trajectory, really made me, and some bad teachers, as well, who kind of collectively made me really think a lot about education and how you could make those systems better, how you can make school an amazing place. And, all the way back, even in high school, I built a website called booksareLong.com to crowdsource AP textbook notes. It's really my first technology project, had thousands of page views each month. And then when I went to school in California, I studied math. And that's really where things took a turn for me. One day when I was in school, I wrote an essay about Palantir. Palantir today is like a $200 billion company founded by Peter Thiel and Joe Lonsdale and, all these kind of, legendary people now. But back when I was, writing this, I think it was less known. It was more mysterious. And so I wrote this essay about Palantir, why they started it, what it was trying to do. That went viral, on the internet. And one of the founders of Palantir, Joe Lonsdale, saw my essay and reached out to me. And, I had the opportunity to go work with him, leave school and go work with him at APC, which is, his venture capital firm. And that was just a tremendous opportunity. 20 years old, right in the heart of things, just surrounded by these, phenomenally talented, smart people, building companies and investing in companies. And you just learned so much. I think the thing that stuck out for me, though, really was that, technology was shaping every other part of our lives, healthcare and, self-driving cars and defense and all these big things that, technology was doing. But when I looked at K-12, there was nothing there. It was sort of this abandoned space. None of the best engineers or designers, none of the venture capitalists, no one was thinking about or working on K-12. And Amir, you might find this kind of wild, but when we started Edio in 2020, the largest edtech company in the world was Chegg, homework cheating app that is now on the verge of bankruptcy. And so really it was just sort of education in the US is an $800 billion space. And yet the largest edtech company was Chegg, a tiny, company that really had no bearing on the K-12 system. And so question I always thought was, why is that? Why have every edtech company, why have they all failed? And, is there an opportunity to do something different?
You mentioned, starting a website in high school. It seems like educational oriented. And have you always been fascinated? Yeah, obviously, at this point, it's been since 2020. You guys, you founded the company, but previous to that, were you thinking at tech as a space that you can make an impact? Was it just something that happened naturally? Tell us a little bit about that.
I thought a lot about education growing up, and how you could make it better. It's such a it's such a long period of your time. Every person, almost every person in the world has some, educational experience. And, for the developed world, it's 12 years, of your life are spent in this, building, concrete building, and I think we at Edia deeply fundamentally believe that school shapes your trajectories. It shapes what you do, who you become, the friends you make, the interests you cultivate. It all shapes. Do you leave town? Do you stay in town? What do you do as your career? What is your sense of self and your aspirations? It's all shaped in those early formative years. And I just had this early on, I had this feeling that this could be so much better. It's always striking how if there's a snow day, everyone, cheers, it's like, yay, we don't need to go to school. And, if school is really, great, you shouldn't feel that way, right? So I think it's always been a question, an obsession. But what really changed was when the pandemic hit. Well, pre-pandemic, there have been all these efforts to build companies in K-12. And, there's all these books, from the 80s and 90s about how the computer is going to change education. And unfortunately, K-12 has been really slow to modernize. Up until 2019, only 10% of kids had school issued devices. And so, you just couldn't, a lot of districts would have bring your own device policies, and they were called cows, computers on wheels, but not every kid had a device all the time. And so that really limited, how much technology a district could adopt, what the classroom experience could be like. And, the pandemic had many, tragic consequences to society. But one of the benefits is that every kid got a device. And, that really, to me, was the first catalyst where it made me rethink, well, maybe there's something you can do here. And then you pair that in 2020, GPT-3 launched. And so it became clear to me and my co-founder that, every kid would have a device with AI, and that should completely transform, what that 12 years in school looked like.
Interesting. I do want to ask you a follow-up question to that, because my daughter, she had to go to school through the pandemic. Obviously, that she was in elementary school. The devices came into play, and the devices have kind of stuck. There's been a shift back from wanting them to do everything on devices to now we're hearing they want to go back to textbooks, which I think is interesting, because I think every kid's gotten so used to working with all these different apps to help them organize their homework. Everything is on some type of cloud platform, and now we're going back to books. And you started the company in the pandemic, so you saw the you're in the midst of this. What are you seeing when it comes to the blend of technology and traditional materials? How do the two work with each other? Are they working with each other, or is it a case of, the electronic version is just going to replace the traditional methods anyways?
Well, it's a great question. I think what we're seeing, just stepping back even a little bit more, is that if every student has a device and every device has AI, that completely changes what that classroom experience can be like and should be like. You no longer, have to have a teacher who is lecturing at, the whole class as a unit. Now, which before was sort of, was kind of the only way to do it, or a static textbook. Those were the only two ways to deliver knowledge and content to kids, was through a textbook or through lecturing. And now you have these other modalities that are personalized and engaging, and in some ways much more powerful. Does that mean the old modalities completely go away? No, certainly not, right? You're still going to have classroom activities and, teacher lectures and, teacher-led things, for sure. Especially in the K2 side, you're definitely going to continue to have physical things, physical projects, physical activities. So I don't anticipate that all going away. But I do think there's going to be a complete rethink of the classroom. I do believe that, and there should be. When you have this completely new, powerful capability, it'd be crazy if the classroom looked the same in 2030 as it did in 1930. We should see progress. We should rethink how these things work. But there's questions more broadly. Like, a lot of schools we work with are implementing cell phone bans, and for that stuff, I think it makes a lot of sense. It's It's not just about putting technology everywhere. It's about having the right experiences, that drive forward an enriching, environment, an enriching day. Clap cell phones, being on TikTok probably doesn't do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe even, looking at what you're seeing, right? You mentioned the product helps even identify with what you're seeing kids that are missing school, like those little subtleties where before, yes, people take attendance, but people may not be aware of the patterns. They may not be aware of what the actual impact is. I guess a product like yours, how does that make a difference? I guess how do you see that impacting the educational end product for these kids?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's so important. So, for some history here, pre-pandemic, about 13% of kids in the US were chronically absent. And what that means is that chronically absent means that you miss about 10% of school or more. So it translates roughly to about a month of school or more. And so in 2019, 13% of kids were chronically absent. Post-pandemic, it rose from 13%. It doubled from 13% to 26%. So a quarter of kids in the US are missing a month of school or more, which is really bad. Like that directly translates to dropping out, and academic underperformance, and other issues as well, gang associations memberships and incarcerations. And so it's really a root cause of so many other bad things that we don't want. And it's been a top priority for, I mean, most districts in the US. If you ask them, it's a top three priority right now, and they're completely unprepared and and unable to really address it. It's a hard problem too. And we spent about last year, when we were developing the solution, we met with over 100 districts across the country to ask them how they were doing chronic absenteeism and the teams they had, what was working, what wasn't. And it really surprised me. What we found is that 75% of absences are unexplained, meaning parents never call in 70% of the time, 75% of the time, no one's ever reached out to the school district and said, hey, we're not going to be here today. You don't know where the kid is. Like they could be cutting class, they could be at a doctor's appointment, they could be late for the bus, they could be, who knows? Like they could be literally anywhere, working a job. And if you don't, that struck us as the root issue here. If you don't know why kids aren't showing up to school, you can't address it. If a student's not showing up because they don't have reliable access to transportation, pairing them with a social counselor does not help. It's the wrong solution for the problem. And so you have to fundamentally understand why kids aren't showing up. And then you can go and track and launch those interventions. And so that's what we built. We built the first AI attendance agent for K-12 districts, where within minutes of an unexplained absence, our AI attendance agent will reach out to parents and say, hey, Amir, your daughter Julia didn't show up for fourth period today. Can you let us know where she is? And you can reply right back over text, and that all gets documented into the student information system or gets escalated to staff members. And so it's a really breakthrough solution. The results so far are pretty tremendous. We're gonna announce all of them at the end of the year and do a more formal written up review. But it's been awesome so far. And I fully expect, Amir, that within 3 years, I think 80% of medium and large school districts are going to have a system like this. It just makes so much sense. It's just, it really is the way that things should be done.
Interesting. I guess when you look at the educational school system, and obviously the bigger the school system, slower the parts move. What are some of the challenges when you see, and obviously you've mentioned even really tiny ones and you've mentioned some big ones, but when you compare and contrast like the bigger ones and how quickly they are able to adopt and move? You said within 3 years. So I'm assuming we're going to start seeing some of these bigger school systems make that shift, which is probably for them what the stereotype is, maybe what would be a glacial place. This would be a very fast pace. How do you, what are your thoughts on that? Is it something that they will be able to move in quick and adopt? Is it still going to be, hey, in 3 years, they're going to start looking at this and within a decade, we'll see these type of solutions in place? Like, how quickly will school systems move on something like this?
Well, with attendance, I think it's a top priority. It's a top issue. I think they're really motivated to solve it. And sometimes a solution like our attendance agent comes along, and it's just so obviously the way things should work. It saves them money. They get more money back from the state. Outcomes improve. it's work that they don't want people to be doing anyways. People don't want to do it. And so if you can, it's better for the parents. It's just better for everyone. And so it's just such an obvious solution where it's like really compelling, and it can get adopted quickly. Other things, there's different paces. We were talking about textbooks earlier, and a lot of states still have a 7-year adoption cycle for textbooks. And money is allocated at 7 years. And, South Carolina, Virginia, a few states like this, they just redid their math, cycle. And it's like, okay, well, at least for the next 7 years, no matter what happens, we might have super intelligent AI, but, Virginia and South Carolina are still going to be paying for math textbooks 7 years out, and that certainly seems crazy, right? But that's just how the system works. And there's a cadence to that, it's unfortunate because districts can make, who aren't quite ready to jump into the future can make, decisions today and then in 3 years from now deeply regret them. But just the way these things are, they're just locked into what they chose a few years ago. So different products and different aspects of the school district will come to it quicker than others. But I think long term, I think it's very clear. The entire classroom experience is going to change dramatically. The student experience is going to be, in part led by AI, and it's going to be much better. And that's certainly what we're working towards.
Absolutely. If you were to look at, I guess, some of the change management that these districts are going to go through, I mean, it sounds like I'm listening. I don't have the depth that you do, but these are no-brainer type of things that you'd want. But obviously, as we just talked about, districts have their own cycles they work within. And then we're talking about AI solutions that, whether it's a human in the loop or it's a little bit more automated. Talk to us about what that change management, what you are seeing with the school districts that are currently adopting your product, just the magnitude of change management that they're going through.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think people understand how big school districts are. The average school district spends $13,000 per student per year. Okay. And if you think about that, a medium-sized district with 10,000 kids, that's a $130 million budget. That's not small. That's like a small cap public company. A large school district might have multi-billion-dollar budgets, and thousands of employees and hundreds of thousands of kids. And, I always want to, we can probably now do this with AI. I always want to transpose the school districts onto the Fortune 5,000. How many of them would be on there? It's a lot. These are really big enterprises, really big institutions. And, to do something at the scale we're talking about, for our math solution, we help districts go. I mean, before Edio, their math scores are flat, 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 flat. With Edio, they'll jump from 1 or 2% growth a year to 8 up to 23% growth a year. It's really phenomenal. Their state exams, attendance, same thing. Giant reductions in chronic absenteeism. And so to get results at that scale, you do need software. You can't have those giant results without some process change or system change at that scale. But doing it is not, you need a clear strategic partnership, a close collaboration, project management that's really tight, a lot of training and support for the staff members, IT integrations. And it's not a small project. It really isn't. It takes a company that's really dedicated to being a strategic partner to school districts to be successful.
Awesome. I love it's. I've had more people on from the education tech community on, and the more I speak to them, the more I realize how much room there is within this ecosystem to bring a lot of what you're talking about and make a positive impact. And I have a daughter who's within this process, so I see some of the gaps and some of what I'm like, oh, you know what, this tech could be good. This tech it could help us with this, and I really find it fascinating. Joe, if somebody wants to reach out to you and kind of cover, ask you something about the product, ask you a follow-up question about some of the details of what you mentioned on the show, what's a good way of connecting with you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Joe Filio on Twitter, and then if it's a more professional related question, my email is joe@edia.app, and we're certainly happy to reach out and talk.
Brilliant. I will make sure we include some of those. And again, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you, Amir. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. I think, as I mentioned, I really am starting to find a little bit of a passion in education tech and the impact it's going to have. And I think Joe walked us through some great use cases of where he is seeing technology go, how his products, impacting the actual market right now, and where he thinks we'll be in a couple of years. So I think that's fantastic. Share this episode with somebody else who might benefit from it. I really appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show is going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.